At AIA Australia, we're making healthy living easier by incentivising your clients with rewards, like discounts on their gym memberships, eligible flights, and insurance premiums with AIA Vitality. It's no wonder that we've reduced client lapse rates by 50% and helped grow client engagement. To find out more, contact your AIA CDM today.
How are we doing, fellas?
We've just got our year's supply of bloopers all ready to go at the start of the year. So
I've only got the word fintech behind me. I've got a bit of a reputation to uphold here, fellas.
Look,
we've got no reputation left.
That's all right.
Everyone, apologies for the delay. Thank you very much for bearing with us. As I mentioned a number of times when I was waffling, we're super pumped to have Aleks with us today. Editor at the IFA. If anyone's not across what they do, you should jump onto their subscription ASAP. But Aleks, welcome. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, it's great. Look, I want to jump straight into it. And can you talk to us a little bit? I figured no one better to talk about the trends that we're seeing in the industry for someone that's sort of sitting at the centre in the news and seeing this stuff every day. So can you give us a bit of an overview on what you're seeing, you know, in the landscape, in the financial advice environment at the moment, and some of the trends that are playing out?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, I'd say firstly, it's a difficult question because when you think about the financial advice industry as kind of a cohesive thing, I think that's kind of an old school way of looking at it. There's a number of different trends that are really advanced in really different kind of professional niches within the community. And I think one of the reasons we sort of struggle in this community is because there are some real vested interests that like there to be a such thing as a financial advisor. In reality, there are different professionals with different specializations, and as such, there are different trends that are happening. And that's why, for example, at our media company, we believe in narrowcasting and in providing niche titles to some of those specializations, whether that be independent and non-aligned advisors, those that are more switched on the tech side, and so on. But generally, having spoken to thousands of advisors here over the last 2 years and also gotten a pretty good stock take of what's happening over in the States, I think there are a few trends that those advisors that are doing very well professionally and in terms of client engagement are doing. And then there are, of course, some external trends as well. The main one that everybody listening will be all too aware of is that over the last few years, we've seen financial advice, the regulation of financial advice, move from being a fairly kind of obscure policy area to being a mainstream political issue. And that is not something that's just happened in Australia. We know the FOFA wars were at times on the front page of the paper. And because of the connections of the various parts of the financial services industry to different political factions, it was a very heated subject. But it wasn't unique to Australia. In the United States, there's been this similar trend of advisors having to adapt to new regulatory hurdles. The Obama administration, about halfway through its second term, with the Department of Labor, introduced its idea of a fiduciary duty. So basically the equivalent of FOFA's best interest duty for our advisors, and they're having their fight there as well. So I'd say the predominant trend over the last few years for Australian financial advisors, unfortunately, has been trying to adapt to the regulatory hoops the government is putting in front of them and still be able to deepen client relationships and turn a profit at the same time. So that's the first trend. Now, in the United States, there is relatively less red tape, and that's why I've been able to identify a few really cool trends that hopefully our advisors here will start to focus on as well. Namely, I think, and there are some advisors in Australia who are starting to think this way, who are moving beyond the compliance hurdle, but scalability, I think, is a really important one. How you can reach a greater number of clients in a more cost-effective way without losing engagement. I think that's a really key trend in the years going forward. And also just generally embrace of fintech, making the tech providers work for you in a way that is, going to be have mutually beneficial outcomes for both the tech provider and for the practice. So I think embracing fintech and working with tech providers, adapting to regulatory change, I think they're probably the two key trends.
Yep. Okay. And I just want to pick up on one of the things that you mentioned at the start there, and around, you know, I suppose the difference within the industry of the different types of advisors and advice groups. And, you know, you talked about giving them labels around, you know, IFAs or different specialists. Do you think, like, what are your thoughts on that? And do you think that it should be clearer, especially for consumers, around the sort of specialists that they're working with?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think really a lot of the industry's problems, I mean, the reason we ended up with FOFA is because of what is perceived to be a conflict within a commission structure. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there's no conflict in a commission structure unless you don't think that there's a commission involved. So I think a lot of the industry's perception problems that led to all this regulatory nonsense was a disclosure problem that the industry had, not a business model problem. And there was a tendency for people to not disclose who their licensee was, to not disclose how much influence that licensee did or did not have over their own business affairs, a tendency not to disclose your business model or whatever it is. And that's not the fault of advisors by and large. That's simply the way the AFSL regime operates, and the way that larger businesses came in to, you know, work around that AFSL regime in the form of, you know, business dealer groups. So I do think there was a disclosure problem. I think the problem is government instead decided to outlaw a particular business model rather than require people to be more upfront about the business model they're operating under. And all we've done as a result is pushed a whole lot of Australians out of advice. And so I worry that, you know, there are some really innovative stuff that financial advisors are doing, but increasingly the ones who are doing those things are moving more to a high net worth client base, which is a perfectly legitimate thing for an advice firm to do. But as a society, it's not solving the problem of mums and dads needing financial advice and not being able to afford it. So certainly I think a focus on disclosure, on being upfront, would be really helpful for the industry and would stop misguided legislation down the track if we embrace that. But more importantly for advisors, it's not just about disclosure because you have to be compliant with the law. It's about value proposition. And it's about owning what it is that you specialise in, rather than sort of, you know, succumbing to what the government says a financial advisor is and must be. Yeah.
And do you think, though, like because we spent a bit of time chatting about, I suppose, the compliance obligations and how to reduce some potential issues, do you think more disclosure is the answer? Because it seems, you know, the last time we chatted about it, I think we sort of came to the view that you know, there's already quite a lot of disclosure, but also it's so easy to sort of avoid some of the I suppose some of the purpose of some of the legislation that's been set out via just, you know, scoping advice and just disclosing it away. And you know, from a consumer's perspective, I suppose it's, you know, it's challenging to understand what are the, you know, the important disclosures in the massive list of disclosures that an advisor provides. What do you see that actually looking like in a way? Do you think in its current form additional disclosures, or do you see some more change needed to actually have the impact?
Well, just on that, I think it would be helpful, for example, for people who have a licensing arrangement with a large bank for that to be more clearly disclosed. But having said all that, I don't think a lot of these problems that disclosure is trying to fix are the fault of financial advisors. You know, the AFSL regime puts liability on the financial advisor. But as I said to you guys, I've met thousands and thousands of Australian financial advisors, and the vast, vast majority of them, you know, 95% upwards, I would say, not only do I think that they are acting in their best interest, but I would recommend my family to go and see them. I think that they genuinely care about their clients and are doing their best to run good businesses. And in most of the cases where consumers have been ripped off or something bad has occurred, it's either because a product has failed or because a dealer group has decided to control the decision-making of the advisor. And those people are not liable under the regime in the way that financial advisors are. So I think that disclosure, I'm a journalist. I believe in disclosure. The more information, the better, right? Yeah. But I think we're trying to fix the problem that financial advisors didn't create. And I think there's systemic corruption much further up the chain that has very little to do with the advisor sitting in the practice who is just trying to comply, and service his clients in the best possible way. So, yeah, disclosure is inherently good, but the problems in this industry are much higher up the chain.
Okay. Yeah, interesting take. I'm going to chat to you about what you're seeing for successful advice businesses in a second, but just for the guys watching in, I've got a couple more questions for Aleks, and then Adrian's got a couple as well. But if you guys have got any questions, anything that you'd like to ask Aleks, you can just type them in the chat box on the right hand side there, and we'll come to them very shortly. So one of the other things you mentioned before, and I wanted to ask you, what are the trends, what are you seeing for the most successful advice businesses? What are those guys doing differently? But also you mentioned before, in particular around legislation, that there's been a lot of, being reactive to the changes that are happening as well. So I suppose two parts. What are the general trends that you're seeing successful advice businesses do? And what are you seeing businesses do, to position themselves to move away from that being reactive and staying in front of the sort of the changing tide of legislation in financial advice?
Sure. Just on the second point, it is not a criticism of financial advisors. There simply has been a whole raft of new, as you guys know in your business, there's a raft of new stuff, and you've got to spend time and resources adapting to those systems. And so that's been a reality, and there's been no choice there. I do think that with some of the exciting reg tech, which is a fancy new word that's going around, but basically, compliance-focused fintech solutions, a lot of that's really booming in the States. I think some of it, hopefully a lot of it will come here if our regulator allows it to. And I think that utilizing some of these automation tools can help to get some of those things off your back. We've got the IFA Business Strategy Day Roadshow coming up soon, and one of the sessions there will be about using, kind of the latest innovations to minimize that client group, that compliance gorilla, get it off your back so that you can focus on more important things. So I think there are increasingly things you can do to minimize that burden. Separately, for those advisors who are interested, I still think there's an argument that they should go out there and try and stop this regulation happening in the first place, and they should fight for their rights as business owners to make their own decisions. When I see far too much at the moment, the financial advice associations, the industry associations or professional associations, as they now term themselves, not trying to do that, but instead embracing what the government is trying to do and helping them enact their spin. So, I think separately, advisors who are angry about this stuff, I still think there's a fight to be had. And as business owners, I think they're better equipped to make these decisions very often than bureaucrats or politicians. Putting all of that to one side, just in terms of some of the trends I'm seeing, that good firms are doing well. Embrace of technology is not an optional one. And it's not about being, innovative or disruptive, despite what the banner behind me may say. It's about, trying to create efficiencies in your business so that you can spend more time with clients or service a greater number of clients and really, get that scale happening in your business. The other trend that I'm seeing that is starting to happen here slowly, and it is part of the move away from a commissions-based system, but I think there's a cultural thing in America where there's a real honesty to the sales process sometimes. They're very confident generally in American business and small business people too. And as a result of that, I saw a lot of very successful firms really honing in on their value proposition and selling that. And it was a really niche proposition. So, for example, I met one guy he's got an RIA firm, so the equivalent of a non-aligned licensee or independent firm. It's gone from a very small practice to being tens of billions of dollars. And he said the secret to his success was actually looping the consumer into the parts that he wasn't doing. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, we got to the point where we realized we weren't actually managing the money. We were managing the clients. We were outsourcing the management of the money to mutual fund, managed fund providers. Or ETF providers, but we weren't telling the consumer that necessarily. And he switched up his mode. And this won't be right for all firms because some firms, are investment management based. But he said, hey, I don't run the money. Steve runs the money. He cares about quantitative easing in Japan. I don't. I care about you. Right? And so there's been this real movement in the States, the financial life management movement, which has really seen people focus in on their client and be more upfront about the relationships that they have with product providers. And we're now seeing success come from that. I'm also seeing and as the managing editor of IFA, some people might say that I'm tooting our own horn here, but I am seeing the growth of independence across a number of countries to be a movement. And that is because largely the global financial crisis exposed some of these relationships. The traditional safety that you feel with financial institutions or that consumers feel, a lot of that has been damaged. And so I think there's a free marketing kick now in being independent of all that. And really that idea of being able to make your own decisions and work in your client's best interest. So that's certainly a trend that is underway. Now, if you can operate in an institutional dealer group and still make all your decisions, then totally fine. Then there's no issue. This is not about politics. It's about, can you as a business owner make your own decisions? And if you can't, you've got to get out and get into a situation where you're making your own shots. Okay,
interesting take. Adrian might have some thoughts on that when we get to him, but I'll leave that. I'll leave that.
We can talk off record about that later, Adrian.
Look, last question from me, Alex, before I turn it over to Adrian and the questions from the guys watching in. What are the biggest pain points that you're seeing for advisors?
Yeah, look, I still think that the compliance thing is number one. I also think that that is the biggest one, and the other one is just dealer groups in general. I mean, that constant the amount of practices that I speak to that are locked in constant negotiation with their licensee over simple things like use of technology or branding of their website or choice of product. And we've almost gotten to the point where financial advisors are just used to being told what to do by people who are meant to be service providers to them. And that's the great irony of the AFSL regime. I mean, people act like they're owned by their dealer groups. In some cases, they are, but that's a very small minority. Most are paying for the privilege of being told what they can and cannot do. And I think that's taking an enormous amount of, and I understand it from the licensee perspective. The licensing game, unless you're pushing product, is not a very profitable game to be in. So they're trying to, generate returns for their shareholders too. And there's nothing evil here. But the issue is that, advisors are realizing that they need to be in control, and they're wasting a lot of time trying to steal back their control. And that's time they could spend with their clients or spend on marketing or spend on growth.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I would definitely agree with that. I know for me, I certainly see dealer groups as they are a service provider to the clients, but I'd agree that, often that can get confused.
And I think a similar trend I'm seeing with technology providers. There are some great emerging fintech providers. We're going to be honouring some of them at the Fintech Business Awards coming up in February. But, they are growing. This movement is growing in terms of there being a community, a large supermarket of different fintech providers to choose from. But I see another pain point, and I think to a certain extent it can be self-inflicted by the advisor. There's a tendency to identify what you want, but then to request it of your single, technology provider. They want everything to be within one software platform, for example. And I understand that from a convenience point of view. But the reality is that the way that technology is going with open APIs and so on is a lot of different pieces of technology are talking to each other and sharing data in really interesting ways. And so I think for advisors to really maximize this fintech opportunity, they need to be going to the tech providers. Well, first they need to be going to their licensee and saying, I want to make my own decisions on this. Otherwise, they've got to go. Secondly, they should be saying to the technology providers, this is what I want, and this is what we need in our practice, and you have to provide it to me. And I think, as I said, financial advisors are consumers, and they're important consumers because they control, to a certain extent, the retirement savings of mums and dads. Not enough mums and dads, but the lucky ones who are getting advice. And so I think that they need to realise they're consumers and start leveraging a little bit more consumer power over licensees and over technology providers, over all of their service providers. That's something that I see American financial advisors doing without any shyness. And anyone who's spent time there, that won't come as a surprise. But I think that would be helpful for a lot of my readers, definitely.
Yeah.
Great. That's awesome. Ben, how are you doing there? Have you finished that?
I did have more, but I'll turn it over, and if I get time, I'll come back at the end.
Well, Alex mentioned, the delicate relationships that everyone has with their dealer groups from time to time, and the tug and play that happens when you're trying to do certain things new in your business, and the limitations that can come through. And yeah, I can definitely vouch for him on that one. The question I really wanted to know is, like, fast forward 5 years, Alex, like we're dealing with all this pain at the moment, and everything is a bit up in the air with technology, with regulation, with what's happening. What is an advice practice going to look like in 5 years' time? What do you really think, with what you've seen in the US, with what you know what's happening in Australia? What's an Australian advice practice going to look like?
Yeah, interesting. Look, I think it's going to look more and more like the ones that are not feeling a whole lot of pain right now. But for others, unfortunately, they may be phased out. So I think it will look different. There will be this kind of parting of the Red Sea, where some will be forced out by the amount of regulation that's there and where it's going. And particularly, we don't know exactly where we're going to end up on the risk advice commissions thing. But for many businesses within my readership, that's going to be very important in terms of their survival and their long-term plans. But I think that increasingly you will see advice practices that are definitely more digital, definitely thinking about scale and presence of the advisor in different ways, in the way that we are in different industries such as fitness. And I think that, I think the value of advice is only going to get stronger and stronger and stronger for those that are honing in on the value proposition. And we see this because we see more and more people getting, personal trainers. We see more and more people having life coaches. We see more and more people having these sorts of lifestyle advisors. And shrinks are also, it's an industry that's not going anywhere. On the flip side, I think where the real pressure is not on the financial advisor, but on the fund manager. Because increasingly, and there are many, many good fund managers out there in Australia, no doubt. But if your value proposition is in managing money, you have got to compete against the robot. And the robot is only going to get better and better at managing money, particularly in a non-active sense. But for financial advisors who have that deep relationship, that's never going to be something that is not of value to human beings. The ones that do very well in the future are going to be the ones that know that are honest about it, and that charge for it accordingly. Now, my issue is I don't know what that means at the lower balance end of the spectrum. Hopefully we can find technological solutions using robo-advice, and there becomes a lucrative business model for young people, for people who aren't on high incomes, and that, you guys, financial advisors, licensed financial advisors, get to be part of that. Because otherwise it's going to be completely left just to intra-fund advice in the industry funds. And arguably there are political forces wanting that to be the case. But I think there needs to be choice for consumers. So financial advisors of the future, I think, will be more independent, calling their own shots, and really focusing on that client engagement first and foremost. They always have done that to a certain extent, but I think if your value proposition is tied up in investment management, then all power to you, but you got to be bloody good.
Fair enough. So with another one I've got is, so we're doing with all the commentary you've had recently. You got two things you can do, two sweeping changes in the industry, and you can do whatever you want. It can be regulatory, it can be licensees. What would they be to get the outcome that you think the industry should be working towards for the consumer?
Yeah, it's tough. I've never been given this opportunity to just get a text and just go at the Corporations Act the way that I'd like to. But
the Corporations Act is on the table as well. Why not?
Yeah, let's put it on the table. Look, I think it's hard to say. I do think, if you look at the difference of the regulatory system in the United States and in Australia, and there's less regulation there, and arguably that's because voters have an appetite for less regulation there that we don't necessarily have here, and so you have to factor that in. But one of the benefits they have to their regulatory system for RIAs, registered investment advisors, those that are basically independents in their language, is that they're all individually licensed with the regulator. And then they come together and they can be in any sort of corporate environment that they want, because they've got individual accountability and visibility to the equivalent of ASIC, to the SEC, right? So if we can, now I've spoken to a whole bunch of lawyers and there's all sorts of reasons and vested interests and things why this can't happen here right now. Part of it has to do with ASIC's funding model and ASIC having an incentive to have fewer licenses, which is one of the reasons, in my view, it's been soft on banks and tough on IFAs, because it wishes it only ever had to deal with 4 lawyers, 4 licenses, not thousands. But if we could find a way, I accept there needs to be regulation. You're not just going to get rid of licensing. We have it for florists in Australia, so I think financial advisors are not going to get away with not having licensing. But I think if we can find a way for individuals to be accountable to the regulator, then we can start to think about interesting ways of coming together in corporate groups, like a partner system in a law firm, for example, where you don't get those conflicts that you get in the AFSL dealer group regime, where you're paying for a license and then they're also taking away some of your rights to make your own decisions. So that would be one of the things, some sort of move towards self-licensing. Perhaps, now I say that in full knowledge that there are many licensees that I have excellent relationships with who I think are doing good things and trying to innovate and doing the best things for their advisors. But the reality is that dealer groups don't exist because of a natural consumer demand. They don't. There's no free market that wants a dealer group. Dealer groups exist because the AFSL regime is set up in a way to make them a necessity unless you're going to become self-licensed, which is very expensive on purpose, in my view. So I think some sort of move, whether it's self-licensing or whether it's just some sort of individual accountability that makes ASIC happy, I think if we did that, we can then think about cool kind of conglomerates, partnership models, different corporate structures that might allow us to scale. So that would be probably the main one that I think of. And I also think the other one is just a cultural thing, and that's for, financial advisors have an embattled mentality right now, and I understand it. They've been going to Canberra for years. They're splits and all this within associations, and that's partly because there are, as I said, all these different kinds of communities. There are risk specialists, there are independents, there are those with an investment expertise, and there are those without. And really, these are different industries. It's just that there are vested interests out there trying to keep you all in one big basket, because it's easier for government not to do real consultation, but to deal with just one person. And there's a revenue benefit to the large financial advice associations in keeping you all in the one pile, quite frankly. So I would like to see advisors take more ownership of their own value proposition and really just, start to realise that they have more purchasing power than they're being told.
Great, Aleks. That certainly answered my question. Love it. Yeah, and to follow that on, it's definitely possible to navigate the current environment and deliver awesome outcomes. It's just, you just got to really apply yourself to it. So, and use everything that's available, including technology and new ways of doing things. And the X4 Advisor Facebook group is a great place to receive all those hot tips. We've got, Ben, I don't know if you're going to jump over to those questions that we've got. We've got a couple of questions there from the audience.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of questions from the audience. If anyone else has got any questions for Aleks, feel free to type them in the chat box. We are sort of running a little bit tight on time. But first question from Dylan Martin, talking about how, we know that the take-up rate for financial advice in Australia is quite low. Are you seeing any new trends around the uptake of advice for specific life stages in particular, or do you have any access to trends in those more life stage specific?
Yeah, I think I know a lot of the big ETF providers in the United States have done a lot of interesting research on this, BlackRock and State Street and so on, Vanguard, and I am seeing over there at least slightly more take up in the Gen Y, Gen X bracket. But I think that's because financial advisors over there have made that a priority. And so they all talk about the generational wealth transfer. And that's like the main buzz term that you hear. Everyone's focused over there on how do you build a 30-year base of clients. How are you going to get, once the baby boomers retire, how are you going to get their kids in? And I feel like that conversation is occupying the same amount oxygen and kind of energy over there as our compliance conversation is having here. And I think so many advice practices would love to focus on a 20-year business plan. They're too busy trying to work out what the legislation is going to be next year and how their business model is going to look. So I do think that we will start to see that take up. I worry that the legislation as it is makes that difficult to do. I do think there is a role for product commissions inside bank branches, as long as consumers know what they're getting. People need financial products and people need small-scale financial advice. And there needs to be an ability for that to happen. It's not going to happen under the current legislation. So I think, it is a problem getting more people in. But I also think there are things we can do. If we try and create some cost efficiencies, then we can focus on bringing more clients into the door in the first place. And that includes clients of all ages. I'm also seeing a lot of people using robo-advice within their own websites. So they'll say to their 60-year-old clients, we've got this new tool for your kids, bring them on there, we'll sign them up to some index funds and we'll get them thinking about their finances. And I think there are tools out there, digital advice solutions that you can increasingly use to focus on bringing in that next generation. I think that's going to be important. But I also think, obviously, there still is work to be done on the perception of the industry, which is stopping some people. And I think it's a misnomer that the majority of people have a negative view of financial advisors. Certainly they have a worse view of journalists, perhaps understandably. But I think the number one misperception about financial advisors is that they are only for rich people. Not that they're crooks or that you shouldn't trust them, but that it's not for me.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I think we've got politicians and industry associations who are helping us move towards that, instead of trying to work out how we can service everybody. So I totally am hearing that as a pain point. I feel for advisors that are looking to bring different demographics in the door and struggling to do that. Insurance has traditionally been a way that advisors can service those families. And if that becomes more difficult for advisors to do profitably, then, there'll be additional pain there. But certainly, I'd encourage advisors to look at the technology that's out there, to keep researching. I know that's a cost on your business just to, be doing that stuff, but there is providers out there that can help you do this stuff. The IFA Business Strategy Day Roadshow this year is going to be focusing specifically on that. How can we create more profitable businesses? How can you sell your value proposition? Stuff that you're not hearing at most association conferences. So we're going to be in Melbourne on the 2nd of March, Brisbane on the 3rd, Sydney on the 7th, Perth on the 9th. So I've got to get that plug in there, businessstrategyday.com.au. Thanks, Bowen.
Nice. Look, just to follow up, and very subtle placement of that, by the way. But I think that, just to your point on, seeing younger demographics taking up advice and that coming out of the US, personally, I think that that's partly, or they've got more time to focus on it with less compliance sort of obstacles in their way. But I've done a lot of reading on this sort of area, and I found that the generational mindset actually drives the Gen Ys more to saying that they need help in particular areas, whereas if you look at Gen X and the Boomers as well, they more think that they can and should be able to do it themselves. So I think that's a factor. That's a factor that plays in as well.
I totally agree. I mean, I think our generation wants financial advice. They're certainly thinking more about finances than our parents' generation was when they were our age.
Yeah.
And so I think that I think there is a huge opportunity there. We just need to ensure that it's profitable, because frankly, that's important. For the industry to grow and to be more vibrant, there needs to be profit.
Yeah, and do you think commission is the answer to that, though? Like you mentioned before, that you see that that's got a role to play. Do you think that's the only way that people can work in these demographics?
No, look, I don't think it's the only way. I just think taking that off the table was not the right answer to the problem. But I think there are all sorts of ways, and I think that it's about automation. I think increasingly, and working out what bits can be outsourced, what bits can be automated by the robot, and what bits cannot. And I think at the moment, there's still a lot of practices are spending a lot of one-on-one time with their most valuable assets, which is, their practice principals and their senior advisors. I think increasingly there will be ways that you can utilize your support staff, your less experienced staff in scalable ways. And these sorts of ideas are starting to come to the fore. So yeah, I agree. I think there's a great opportunity in younger clients, but it's not front of mind just yet.
Yep, agreed.
Well, Alex, just in finishing, one last question. Would you ever become a financial advisor? And if you would, how would you do it, and who would you focus on, and what would you do?
That's a good question. No, I would not. I feel like I know enough about the...
Are you saying we're mugs?
Pardon?
Are you saying we're all mugs?
No. I think your financial knowledge is simply better than my own. Anyone who's seen my bank statements will know that I'm in no position to be giving financial advice to anyone. So look, I think we all have a role to play. Mine is in hopefully helping to form these new communities that are emerging, provide information that's going to help advisors grow better businesses, and ultimately get information out there to consumers that will help them make right choices. So I have enormous respect for what you guys do. I'm not sure that I would do the same. If I was to do it, and when people come to me and say they're thinking about it, I tell them to think long and hard about their licensing decision, whether to self-license. And if you're not self-licensing, then be very sure about the people that you're doing business with, because there are groups out there who want you to succeed, and there are groups out there who frankly do not care. And so I think that, that's a really important first decision that I would make if I was becoming a financial advisor. But I think I'll leave that to you guys, and I'll just keep, putting information out there and doing what I do.
It would be a great loss.
Alex.
Would be a great loss to the industry if we didn't have you there taking the fight to the big guys for us.
Very kind, mate.
No. Cool, guys. Well, look, thank you very much for joining us today, Alex. It's been great to have you on. I feel like a very fitting way to kick off the year. Apologies again to the guys, and thanks for bearing with us through our technical issues at the start. We're coming back to you next Thursday, same time. We're going to be running these XY Lives weekly. Thanks again to the guys at AIA for making all of this happen, and look forward to catching you guys next week.
Thanks, guys. Next time I'll interview you.
No, yeah, you're on.
Cheers.
Alex, see you guys.
These guys, peace out.
Thank you.